Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 191, and we're here to talk about law on the West Coast. Bruno law, really. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm Alan Haley. And today is July 1st, 2015.
It's not often that I get to sit down with Alan twice in a week, but as circumstances have arisen, and he doesn't have his Hawaiian shirt on this time, we are going to sit down and talk a little bit of breaking legal news. And it's going to be, I need Alan here because he's going to be using some legal terms that he's going to need to define for us because it's new to us. I'll give you a quick summary. People know that St. James wanted to leave the diocese under Bishop Bruno. Lawsuits ensued. It came to the point where they lost and left. A new congregation was put there by Bishop Bruno, but Bishop Bruno's decided, that property has value, and I need to pay some bills after suing people for so many years, so I'm going to sell that. And he goes forth and finds some developers who want to pay some money for it. And it seems the property is worth $15 million. Even me in my temptation would probably fall for $15 million. And so he goes about trying to sell it. He, without letting the congregation vote or have due notification, says, by the way, you're out of here. I'm selling. It upsets the vicar of the church. She starts a campaign, a social networking campaign to stop him. And lo and behold, he is stopped not because of anything other than the person who originally gave him the property had put the stipulation in there for church purposes only. Well, okay, the first question people are asking, well, why doesn't this apply to the first St. James congregation?
Okay, well, let's back up a minute. The property was first donated to the diocese, or to the Bishop of Los Angeles, by the developer Griffith Corporation, the original Orange County Newport Beach developer there.
Right.
Lido Isle. And that was in 1945. And at that point, they put a stipulation on, we're giving you this very valuable beachfront property, but it's to be used for church purposes. And so long as it's used for church purposes, no problem. But if you ever break that agreement and use it for other purposes, the land automatically, you lose the land and it automatically comes back to the Griffith Corporation. Okay, so St. James is in there. They built this beautiful church. They're using it for church purposes from 1980s, late 1980s onward. 20 odd years there, very happy. And that's not violating anything because they're doing what the developer wanted, namely using it for the church purposes. However, when the congregation voted in July 2004 to leave the diocese, think of this, we're 10 years into this now, this saga. 10 years ago, they voted to leave the Diocese of Los Angeles. And then Bishop Bruno sued them under the Dennis canon. What is the Dennis canon? It's a claim of a reversionary interest, namely an interest in the property imposed on it by the Episcopal Church and the diocese that says the property's fine with you. You can keep it and use it as you wish as long as you remain in the Episcopal Church.
And it's held in trust by the diocese.
Right. So that if you ever leave the Episcopal Church, the diocese takes over the property. And that's what we call a reversion because it reverts, so to speak. In this case, it doesn't revert because the diocese, well, I guess so, yeah, the diocese originally owned the property, right? Okay, so the Dennis canon is sued on, and the California courts uphold it against the departing congregation after numerous appeals up to the California Supreme Court. The irony was, as we noted, I think earlier, that they had a letter from the Bishop of Los Angeles, earlier Bishop of Los Angeles, his chief advisor, waiving the Dennis canon in the acquisition of some of the property there that they acquired in addition to the original 4 parcels.
Right.
Anyway, that didn't help them. The court had said that no bishop can waive the Dennis canon interest. It would have to come from the national church. So now, after they win the lawsuit, the remnant congregation, the ones that wanted to remain in the Episcopal Church, started filling the pews, and they got a vicar who was very energetic and started calling more people and getting more people to come into the congregation. She thought they were doing extremely well. And all along, without her knowledge, Bishop Bruno was making offers and inquiries about selling the property. He did find a developer for the area who has a huge project planned, who plans to tear down the church and all its buildings, tear up the parking lot, and put up a big condominium commercial complex that would be, taking advantage of the proximity to the beach and the views. And so he thought he had it all clear. He had given the congregation their walking papers, said you have to be out of here by last Sunday. They did hold a service there last Sunday. There was a desperation lawsuit filed at the last minute to block it, but it turned out that that was not going to work. And so they thought they've lost the property. And then now comes this letter from Griffith Corporation saying, remember when we gave you that property back in 1945, we included a little clause in there that says we get the property if you decide not to keep using it for church purposes. And it sounds like you're not going to be using it for that. You're using it to make a big profit, and that's not the way we gave it to you for. So Bishop Bruno's immediate reaction, of course, was, let's sue. I'm a Christian, let's sue. So he filed a lawsuit against the Griffith Corporation for what's called slander of title. Now that's another wonderful legal term. Slander, we all know, that's when you go around calling somebody names and saying they're a bad person or a crook.
Which never happens on this show, but go on.
Of course not. All right. But slander of title is when you impugn or attack the validity of someone else's title.
Right.
And they're saying that, so Bishop Bruno is saying that Griffith Corporation, just by virtue of asserting its reversionary interest that it retained in 1945, is somehow impugning the validity of Bishop Bruno's legal title to the property. Of course it is. It's making it impossible not to sell it. I mean, it's blocking the sale, all right, while this lawsuit's going on. And until the reversionary claim's resolved. Well, it turns out what Bishop Bruno's actually claiming is that the Griffith Corporation in 1984, I believe it was asked to release its reversionary interest in 3 of the 4 parcels that the church wanted to develop as parking. Mm-hmm. It had started to become very popular and needed more parking, so they wanted to be sure that they wouldn't lose the land by turning it into a parking lot for the church. So they contacted Griffith Corporation, who agreed that was a reasonable ancillary use for a church. They saw no problem with that, so they released the interest in those 3 parcels that became parking lots. However, they did not release the interest in the 4th one. They expressly just left it out of the numeration. That's the parcel on which the church building stands. And so that interest is very much alive in my view. I mean, how Bishop Bruno can argue that because they released the interest in 3 of them, they meant to release it in all 4, I don't know where he's going to go with that. Some think that people I've talked to think that this is just a ploy, a bargaining ploy, and that he realizes he's got lots to split there. There's $10 million of profits. If we assume that it cost him $4 to $5 million, the diocese, with all its litigation costs, and he sells it for 15, he's got about 10 million in profits. And if he sues the Griffith developers, then he's going to say, hey, come on, listen, I'll slip you 3 million or 4 million or whatever and let me have the rest.
Well, here's one of the interesting things. A lot of people, when they apply for a mortgage and buy a new house, there's always that fee for title search.
Yes.
This is why you want a clear title. You want to be sure that somebody had not made some stipulation a long time ago that the land could only be used for, trout fishing or something like that. And
right.
This is one of those reasons where it's good to use a lawyer when you buy a property.
Right. So, and what do you call it when a reversionary interest that you use to acquire title to the property from the people who were using it for so long, because they broke that reversionary term, and what happens when you get another reversionary term thrown at you? That's called poetic justice.
Yes, it is. Well, it is. And I'm like, well, what could he do? Could he promise to have the developer put a chapel on the third floor and therefore it's still used for church purposes? Or is the building just going to be using the foundations of the parking lot and just cover the church and build up from there? I mean,
Right.
nothing is beyond the imagination of the Diocese of Los Angeles. So we'll have to see what happens.
No, and I've looked into this Griffith Corporation.
Yeah.
They're a 100-year-old company. They're completely employee owned now.
Oh, wow.
So the original founders of the company gave it to the employees.
Yeah.
They say we honor integrity and our contracts. We always keep our promise. So that sounds like an interesting person for Bishop Bruno to take on.
To run into. Oops.
Yes.
Now, a little House of Bishops news that happened a day or two ago. The House of Bishops approved gender neutral changes to marriage. And so I wanted to talk to you about that because it's not completely done yet. The House of Deputies have to do it, but being they're usually more liberal than the House of Bishops, if that's possible, it's pretty much a done deal. How does this work throughout the church?
All right. Well, the latest changes to the marriage canon no longer make it overtly in conflict with the Book of Common Prayer. If you read the general neutral language to mean still marriage between a man and a woman, as the Book of Common Prayer specifies it is. But if you read the gender neutral language as a way of getting around the Book of Common Prayer, so that nod, nod, wink, wink, we can marry two people now of the same sex because the canon says so, then what they're doing is they're still subverting the Book of Common Prayer, which is superior to the canons. It's harder to change and it takes a longer time. And so they really haven't changed their main course, which was to get this done by hook or crook, any means now to start being able to marry people of the same gender. And to hell with the Book of Common Prayer, whatever it says, we'll just ignore it.
Now, which has been the practice already. I mean, to be honest, that's nothing new, but we've always said nothing can happen until they change the prayer book. Well, that's not true. They've ignored the prayer book, and they've not gone about the process even yet of changing the prayer book.
Right, and even the trial rights that they put out starting last General Convention for blessing same-sex unions, those are unconstitutional in light of the requirement of the Constitution. First of all, the only trial rights that can get approved are ones intended to replace those in the Book of Common Prayer. These are intended to be in addition to those in the Book of Common Prayer. And second of all, they ignore the Constitution's requirement that to approve those trial rights at a single General Convention requires a vote by a majority of all the bishops in the House of Bishops entitled to vote, which there's some 300 plus bishops in the House of Bishops, which mean a majority would mean 150 plus. They only got 129 votes on this latest proposition. They got even less the last General Convention. So they're just, riding roughshod. And to read the account, for example, of how Bishop Martins tried to get out a substitute report in place of this travesty they were starting to commit with the marriage ceremonies, and then he checked it with the parliamentarian. It was ruled perfectly in order to make that a substitute.
Yeah.
He moved. They challenged it. The parliamentarian ruled, and then a bishop rose and said, "We challenge the parliamentarian's ruling," as the Robert's Rules allows them to do.
It does, yes.
And by a 2/3 vote, they turned over the resolution of the chair that this was in order. So they went against Bishop Jeffrey Shorey, but they also just torpedoed Bishop Martin's resolution in that rather massive show of power. We're in charge here. You don't try any of this stuff. And so they're running roughshod over the Constitution and the canons, and the church is suffering as a result because it's a lawless church. There's no one in charge. And everything is being bent to, this is like the Robespierre days of terror. Everything's being bent to the purposes of the people who are running the show, and they don't care who gets damaged and what gets damaged in the process.
Well, I have before me applications for the ACNA. If you want to join, I know I'm sending one to George. He's not taping today because he feels very hopeless about the church. And I just let you know there's other alternatives out there for people viewing this who are still in the Episcopal Church, but there are still safe bishops out there as well. It's
Right.
one of those things. Some people are going to stay in the Episcopal Church and hold out, and we keep them in our prayers. Some. And it's interesting. Everybody has their different litmus test. Mine was, obviously Gene Robinson, but what is your trigger?
Yeah.
And
And
for South Carolina, it was the changing of last year's or the General Convention 3 years ago.
yeah, and for me it was this convention's endorsement by the bishops of blasphemy.
Hmm.
In the marriage rite. They're comparing the union of same-sex peoples between the union of Christ and the church, and that's just blasphemy. And so they voted for it, and they've endorsed it, and that's enough for me. I'm no longer calling myself Episcopalian. And my bishop was one of the ones who voted for it. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm done with him. This is a lifetime Episcopalian out the window just because they want to endorse blasphemy, and I can't go there. How can you ask an ordained member, ordained in the Church of Christ, the one true apostolic church, or that's who all orders are in that one true apostolic church, and how can you ask someone ordained to that order to speak blasphemy of Christ? It just boggles my mind that they can go there. Boggles my mind, and I refuse to be a further part of it.
Alan, my heart goes out to you and your family and your diocese. That's it for today's Anglican Unscripted. Leave it on a little downer note, but once again, God is unshaken. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm Alan Haley, and this has been episode 191 of Anglican Unscripted.